And welcome to Optics, featured artist in the Griffin Gallery at WinCam. I'm Krista Dix, the Executive Director of the Griffin Museum of Photography, and we're thrilled you've joined us to hear from our current featured artist, Lisa Ryan. The Griffin Museum is based in Winchester, including our satellite here at WinCam. Lisa Ryan is a night photographer and light painter. The influence of her fine arts education can be seen in her use of light to draw and paint. Working with various light tools, she incorporates gestures and movement. In addition to lighting landscapes at night, she creates scenes, including clothing the figure and creating night gardens from light. Welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's talk a little bit about becoming light. Where did you start with your photography, and how did you end up being a night light painter?
Well, I went to art school, Pratt Institute, in the 1970s, long time ago, and I was originally a painting major, but I did a lot of paintings of night scenes even back then, and I got really interested in photography at art school. And of course, in those days, it was film photography, and it was black and white, and it was street photography and documentary work, all of which I think is amazing work, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. I wanted color. I was interested in color, and I was interested to see how you could manipulate light and create all sorts of interesting effects. So I worked as a photographer's assistant, and then I ended up being an art therapist for a period of time and went on a sort of long journey. But around 2000, digital cameras came in, and they could photograph at night. And since then, they've just gotten better and better. And Jürgen Lobert and I sort of organized the Greater Boston Night Photographers, starting in 2013. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I started to be interested in illuminating scenes at night and adding your own light, providing your own light. And we were actually doing some work for a show, and I was on a beach just experimenting, and I thought, well, what happens if I take a flashlight and draw an arch around myself? What happens if I take the flashlight and I drape it around myself? And I noticed you got all sorts of interesting effects. What happens if I stand in front of the flashlight? Well, I get a silhouette, maybe I get a shadow. And so I sort of created an image for that particular show a long time ago, and I've really been experimenting with drawing with light ever since. So it kind of harkens back to art school. I wasn't a great painter, but I was good at drawing. And so now I'm drawing with light, and that's really how that got started.
So for the average, or for the hobbyist photographer, looking at your work and looking at how light painting works, and I know my feeble attempts are incredibly complex and not too hard. So how do you get started in that? How do you go from, I want to use my iPhone at night to photograph this building, to photographing these big, beautiful expanses? It's got to take a lot of patience. And it's got to have a lot of moments where you know that moment is the right moment. Or do you feel like having all night to paint something out gives you a little bit more flexibility?
Well, in some ways, kind of all of the above. I mean, night photographers are sort of the exact opposite of, say, nature photographers. I mean, bird photographers will go out and boom, they'll come back with several hundred images. Night photographers will go out and maybe they'll come back with 5 or 10. And of that, maybe 2 or 3 will be any good. It's a lot of trial and error. And then you go out and you try it on your own, and then you come up, you're like, well, but if I did this, maybe if I do it for longer, or what happens if I have 2 tools? What if I have a flashlight that will change colors? What happens if I have red and blue? Well, now I'll have violet. Red and green, now I have some yellow. So now you're sort of mixing a color palette, sort of the sky is the limit. Mm-hmm. And then from there, you start making your own light tools. And in the meantime, just through experience, I sort of built up a kind of an intuitive database where I sort of know, well, for this kind of ambient situation, I've got to expose for this long, or I know this light tool is brighter, so it's going to be a shorter exposure. I know I'm going to have to, when I started to introduce movement, because it's the images that are in this particular exhibit are sort of like the third iteration, really. The first one was really about what I called wearing light. And it was really about taking the figure and creating, almost like one's own fashion design, creating all these amazing sort of clothes out of light.
Well, I have to say, one of my favorite images ever is with a light cape, is a person in a landscape with a light cape. And I think that's one of the first iterations of how this all happened. So how did you get from a person in the landscape with a light cape to going so dark into sort of a superhero sort of stance? These are all very interesting portraits that are surrounded by light. And let's start with that and see, and then I'll ask my follow-up question.
Well, it really, in doing that was the second sort of iteration, was doing these, taking it outside and incorporating some landscape, maybe water or beach or trees, forest, like the image you're talking about. And sort of now you have sort of the figure within a sort of story almost, and sort of illuminating the landscape and then illuminating the figure and making it part of it. But then I started thinking, well, what happens if you have motion? Now, when you have motion, you start to lose the shape of the figure a little bit, and now you are incorporating time and shifting light. And so the idea of sort of transformation, you know, sort of the figure becomes light. You sort of go from matter to energy. And that's this new series. The superheroes are becoming, you know, sort of becoming light, becoming energy. They're sort of portraits of transformations. And so different tools produce different kinds of a sense of motion, but it then becomes less about just the figure, and also it's really an attempt to document some kind of transformation, and it's a lot about dance and movement.
So let's talk a little bit about color. For those that, I mean, shooting in the daylight and getting color right is hard enough. So when you start doing your work at night, do you know what color you want something to be? Do you have an idea in your head? Do you sketch it out? Do you say, I need something blue today, or I need something burgundy, or something vibrant red? I mean, a lot of it reflects the energy of the movement that you're doing, but also, do you really think about, well, I have 5 blue pictures, do I need a red one? Or like, how does that all come about?
Well, and some of that is the different light tools. Some light tools, like I have some fiber optic tools that have different modes. You know, they have strands attached to a handle, and they have different modes that you can program. And so they will change color, or they'll stick with one color, or you can have 2. So some of that is deciding, well, okay, let's see what happens with multicolor. Multicolor is really tricky because if you expose for too long, you're going to end up with white light. And so you don't want that. So that's going to be a shorter exposure. So you have to think about that in terms of your movement, because a shorter exposure will silhouette the figure more, will give you less of a sense of movement. The other thing about all of this that's really important is it's fun. You know, I think sometimes when I was in art school, we all took ourselves really, really seriously. And I think it's important to be serious about one's intent and wanting to create something new and exciting. But it's also really important to have fun, and this is a fun process.
So as part of your toys, do you have a lightsaber?
Oh, yes.
I want magic wands, and I want lightsabers, and I want jump ropes, or like, how many different ways, how many different tools do you have in your toolkit right now to create this work?
Oh, many. I have many. I probably have 20 or 30. I've made some myself. I've bought many of them from Jason Page, light painting brushes. Anybody
What's
who
a light painting brush?
A light painting brush is, it's his idea is you take a flashlight, you put a rubber adapter on, you put a light sword with maybe glittery sticks inside it, or perhaps mylar paper inside of a clear plastic tube, so that when you move it, it's going to refract and bend the light and create different colors.
So kind of like one of those fiber optic crazy lamps that you can go find at a lighting store that sits on your table and it moves. It's all got the little light at the end.
That's the fiber optic group is, you might have long strands of fiber optics with like little lights attached to them, and those sort of flash at different speeds and different colors. Or there's actual brushes, fiber optic brushes that have the little lights at the end of the fibers. So when you move them, you get this sort of swirl effect. Or if you just aim them straight at something, you will get these myriad little dots. So it's different. Then there are cutouts, plexiglass cutouts, that will give you a kind of shape, and you can then tape them or paint them or put all sorts of stuff on them, and that will give you interesting shapes, and almost like a brush, it will give you bands of light that you can use as you're moving.
So let's talk time frame a little bit. How long are these exposures?
Well, that varies greatly. I would say probably in the group of images in this exhibit, probably the longest is 2 or 3 minutes, and then the shortest might just be half a second, a quarter of a second. And it really depends, again, on the movements, on the brightness of the tool, on how much color you want to capture. So there's that's one of the, I think I'm sort of an intuitive photographer too, and that probably makes me probably not like very good teacher material, because people want to ask, what are the settings? How should I set up my camera? Perfectly reasonable. This is a pretty intuitive process. So within certain parameters, there's a lot of variability,
Right.
and that's.
So when you're at a location and you're only getting a couple shots per night, that's something that makes perfect sense to me. But when you're in a studio, you have the option to do it over and over and over. Do you find that you're using the same sequence of movements every time, or do you do a movement and you're like, maybe not, and then try it again? And how often are you repetitive, or do you just continue to move in new directions until you get the capture that you're looking for?
Like sometimes one, sometimes the other. Sometimes I'll go into the studio with a very specific idea and just keep working on that and working on that and working on that, and until I sort of get what I'm after. And that can be 25 or 30 shots, just doing it over and over and over again. And I think the other thing about this is it's a little bit zen, is that sometimes you can't get too attached to, this is going to sound a little out there, but sometimes you can't get too attached to a specific outcome, because things are going to happen along the way and you're going to say, oh, okay, this is, maybe this is better than the original idea I had.
But there has to be a downside to it. So what, as a photographer, like, when do you get frustrated, and how do you make the change or the shift from frustration back to joy?
Well, there is a downside to it, in that sometimes you get tired. It's dark. Sometimes you bump the tripod.
There's not enough coffee?
You got to start all jazzed up, and that really affects your movements. Sometimes you bump the tripod. Sometimes you can't make it work. Sometimes, there's certainly times when you'll come back with nothing. And then, there's always a lot of self-doubt, like maybe I don't really know what I'm doing. Maybe this isn't really good. Maybe all of this has just been kind of a happy accident, Maybe I really don't have proficiency. So there's certainly plenty of room for self-doubt. And I think the other thing is that certainly in my work, and maybe this is true for other photographers, it's like a music staff. There's different lines of work that come through it. So this lighting the figure is a line that's been in a long time. But for example, right now, I'm not doing any of that because I've just done it for 8 months straight. And there's part of me that kind of doesn't want to do it anymore. Not never, but not right now. I'm doing other stuff.
Let's talk a little bit about the work that's on the walls right now. And they do remind me of superheroes, but are they superheroes to you? Like, as a viewer, what do you hope that I take away with the images?
That was your word, was superheroes, and it kind of it sort of crystallized it for me, because when we were having the portfolio review, I had, a couple of those, and then I had some outdoors, and I had sort of a lot of different, some of the wearing light. I had a whole bunch of different stuff. It may not have been all that coherent, but it crystallized something for me. I thought, okay, let's just focus in on the aspect of movement and transformation, and not get into, well, here's the story of the magical landscape, or here's what happened when she disappeared into the water, or whatever that particular storyline was. Let's just focus on the power of transformation, the power of light, the ability to lose oneself in the dance, in movement, to really be present in the moment. Because life goes by really fast, but if you're present in the moment, it doesn't go by so fast. That moment can last a longer time. So I think those are some of those are my beliefs. I mean, that's a core belief for me. So I think in many ways that's what this particular group of images is about.
So are they all self-portraits then?
Yes, I guess they are in that sense. I mean, there's one or two that kind of look like a man, but it is me, so that I think they are sort of different aspects. Some are the importance of sort of the strength of the image. That's important to me. The idea that some of them are pretty grounded. On the other hand, some of them are sort of floating, sort of having a range. So yes, I guess you could say, I hadn't quite thought of it that way, but I guess you could say that they are. And I'm always careful not to face the camera, because I don't want my features. I don't want it to be me specifically. I want other people to look at it and say, well, that could be me.
Find themselves in it.
Can they see themselves in that particular image?
So do you think of the colors as sort of a mood shifter? I mean, there's two things happening in the image. One is the actual motion and movement and how the light envelops you. Sometimes it's absolutely fluttered and completely diverse. Other times we see you completely wrapped in light. Like there's the one image that's almost purple, but we see more of an outline of you than in some of the others where there's like a green, almost Ghostbusters image in there.
Yes.
So how do you get from one point to the other, or how do you know when the image is finished that way?
Well, I think that I'm really kind of drawn to warm colors and fiery oranges and reds, and that's the stuff I really like. That's what's in my garden. It's all fiery flowers. I guess it's not very restful, but I'm not a restful person, I guess. But on the other hand, I wanted to have a broad range of colors, and that particular magenta image is one of my favorites, and it's not really much of a magenta purple sort of person, but that magenta was that's a light whip image, that's a fiber optic image, and the power, that had such range, just that one particular color. So to me it had a lot of richness. So I thought, all right, let's really sort of explore this and see what let's push this tool and really see what it'll do. And so some of it has a little bit of a strobe effect, and that lightens the color. And there's some others too, where if you strobe it at the very end, then the color changes, the light changes, and you might go from magenta into blue a little bit. So, sort of letting, and sometimes, and I mean, that creates a completely different feeling. I mean, that's you know, color, the whole psychology of color is very powerful. You know, the restfulness of blue, and the, you know, red is so stimulating, and what we can see better, you know, where our eyes actually see, I think it's green and yellow better, because, you know, that's evolution. You know, a lot of the world is green, was. So it's really about sort of responding to the different colors, and, you know, sometimes you're in different moods. You know, let's try something more calming. Not everything has to. I guess I wanted the exhibit to have a different levels of energy.
So again, for the hobbyist, how do we start? So we go out, we buy the tools, we find ourselves in a dark space, or we take ourselves out to a location, and then just start playing. Right?
Right.
Is that,
well,
in a way?
Yeah, in a way, yes. In a way, yes. Set your camera up on the tripod. You know, start it running. Just let it run. Don't get too hung up on trying to dial in a particular exposure. You know, you'll figure out what the ambient light is in that situation. So you'll have gee, I've probably got a window of, you know, give yourself some time, particularly as a beginner, of maybe, say, 4 or 5 minutes. So you're going to shoot at low ISO. Give yourself plenty of time, you know, at least f.56. So you've got some time, because, I mean, if you're going to set yourself up, you know, you'll get in there and boom, now it's, you know, oh, nothing happened. You know, so give yourself time, and then you can just start out with flashlights. Just start out with different flashlights, and just get used to the idea of what happens. What happens if I go further from the camera? You know, it's going to be less bright. What happens if I hold my hand over part of it and direct the light? What happens if I stay between the camera and the light? Now I'm going to be in the image. Do I want that? What happens when I shine the light into the camera? Now I got to move fast, because I'm going to draw. What happens if I shine the light away from the camera? Now I'm going to illuminate part of the landscape, or part of the scene, part of the street or the room. So what kind do I want to show the texture? I'm going to scrape the light along the edge. I'm going to be at a 45-degree angle to the camera. So all of these things are things I would recommend just starting with a couple of simple flashlights, and learn what the light will do.
so somebody can go out in their backyard?
Go
and
out in
start
their
playing.
backyard with a couple of flashlights, as long as they're not too bright. You know, don't get one of those, you know, ones with the big handles. You know, just a couple of little flashlights that fit in your hand, and give yourself an idea of what the light will do. If you stand and you just click the light on and click it off, voila, now you've simulated fireflies. You know, there's just so many things that you can do before you get into the tools, you know, and then you can say, well, now I'd like to attach something to the flashlight. And, you know, for example, many light painters go to, like, county fairs, and, you know, they sell all these kind of lightsabers. They're kind of bright, and some of them make noise, but, you know, you can start out with something like that and wave those around, and they strobe, and you'll get bands of light.
Lightsaber.
It's
Yeah.
so much fun. And then what'll happen is you'll say, well, gee, these are kind of bright, and I want to be able to control it. So then you can kind of open them up and sort of, you know, doctor them up a little bit so they're not as bright, and break a bunch of them in the process, but they're only $5 or $10, and then you're kind of on your way.
So you mentioned earlier about your meetup group, or the light painters group. Talk a little bit more about that, and how does having a group help you be more creative or succeed at doing the images that you want to make?
Collaboration is a, you know, that's one of the things that's really nice about the light painting community, is that it tends to not be competitive and more collaborative, and people are very generous about sharing how they did that. And it's really fun to work together. And many times on meetups for Greater Boston Night Photographers, you know, people will get together in groups of 3 or 4, and, okay, I'll do this and you do that, and then I'll run around here on the edge and kind of create images together, which is really fun. And the other kind of collaboration that's really important are critique groups. I've been in a couple of critique groups for, you know, 8 or 9 years, and the people in those groups that look at your work and give you feedback and help you grow. I mean, we've exhibited together, we've traveled together, we've worked on projects together, had a lot of fun together, and we've really helped each other grow tremendously. And, you know, I have to sort of mention two names here, Jürgen Lobert being one and Gordon Saperia being the other. And the three of us, there are many other people too who've made wonderful contributions, but we've been together a long time and we've learned a lot from each other. And meeting on a regular basis and working on projects together, and someone can say, you know, I was thinking about your project, and what about if you did this? And both of them have really made a lot of suggestions and been a big part of the exhibit that's here. So I sort of feel like I want to give them a shout out for that.
So what else should we know about Becoming Light?
What I'd like someone to take away from this is that sometimes in photography it feels like everything's been photographed and everything's been done. And there's always somebody out there who's got better gear and can travel to more exotic places and can do it better than you can. But in the world of light painting and drawing, I mean, and I think in the world of night photography too, and maybe in general, I don't know, those are night photography and light painting is what I know. There's a lot that you can still explore. You know, there's so much still to try and to try variations of that. For example, I just use myself as the figure, and I've always done that, mostly out of necessity, because there's not lots of people who want to hang out and stand there and move around with lights over and over.
And are you asking us to be up at 2 o'clock in the morning too, when it's darkest?
Yes.
Yeah, there'd be a lot of coffee required for me.
What is the problem with that? But when I had the chance to use models, that's really hard, because now it's not that sort of internal feedback loop that I have. I mean, I have this sort of intuitive database that I move around and I'm sort of thinking about what I'm doing, and you know, but when you have models, now you've got to communicate and use language and use words, and it's sort of like, okay, could you try this and that, and you need to communicate with them to keep things alive. That's really hard. I'm not very good at that, and I admire photographers tremendously who can do that. I'm not really one of them, but that might be a direction for me to move into. But that's the thing. I guess I'd like this exhibit to say there's always more. You know, it's an expanding universe.
Thank you so much. Becoming Light is such an engaging walk through energy and light and matter and emotion, and I'm just so grateful to you. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you, Krista. Thank you for the opportunity, but also for the community that you create here at the Griffin. You give us artists a chance to exhibit, to take classes, to participate in programs, to meet each other. You really nurture and support a very large group of people.
Thank you.
So thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate that. And with that, thank you for joining us for this edition of Optics, featured artist in the Griffin Gallery at WinCam. Lisa Ryan's series, Becoming Light, is on the walls until September 10th and is free and open to the public during WinCam's regular hours of operation. WinCam is located at 32 Swanton Street. For more information on the Griffin Gallery at WinCam or other programs offered through the Griffin Museum, log on to our website at griffinmuseum.org. Thanks for watching.